Hello, I'm Dr. Keith Martin, the Executive Director of the Consortium of Universities for Global Health here in Washington, D.C. And I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Ruth Gibson, who's a scholar at Stanford with extensive experience in addressing humanitarian emergencies. Welcome today for this extremely important webinar that we're holding on a neglected but vitally important humanitarian crisis that has been unfolding for some time. The issue today is stopping the targeted killing of healthcare workers and first responders in Palestine and in Lebanon. And today we have a number of esteemed colleagues who have seen this up close and personal. They're going to share their views about what is happening. And importantly, from our perspective here, is we need to address and engage in the effective advocacy to stop these atrocities. Imagine for a moment if you were a paramedic. You go out very bravely to go and save somebody's life who is being injured in an attack. What is happening now is Israel and Israeli forces are waiting for those people, those brave first responders, to come to save lives, and they are killing them in the act of while they're trying to save somebody's lives. Nobody in any way, shape, or form can slice that and think that that is somehow acceptable. It is a grotesque and illegal act, but it's a humanitarian. Um, um, I mean, it's immoral in every way. So what we want to do is come out of this with a set of requests. We want you, dear listener, to be able to advocate for not just making condemnations, but being able to, speaking personally, stop the flow of weapons to Israel, stop the flow of aid to Israel, and to prosecute those who are involved in murdering these brave men and women. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gibson, who is going to also provide some introductory comments and also to be able to introduce the wonderful speakers we have today. So Ruth, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. So first and foremost, I'd like to welcome you from around the world. We have people joining us both on the panel, but also in our participants today from Lebanon, from Palestine, from Jordan, from Iran, people from the International Committee of the Red Cross, the United Nations. We have senators from across the US. And I think that this is a really important meeting of the minds to discuss what is happening in terms of the double and triple tap strategies that the IDF is using now, expanding into southern Lebanon. But also today we are going to be touching upon what's happening in terms of the kidnapping and torture of healthcare workers who are being detained. And so it's really important that we're gathered here today. And as we move through the speakers, at the end, we're going to have a significant amount of time for questions and answers. And you're welcome to enter that into the chat. And we also have the option to unmute members of the audience if you can identify yourselves so that you can ask questions live to our panelists. And with that, I'd like to begin by welcoming Dr. Evelyn Hitti. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Hitti. Dr. Hitti is the professor and chair of emergency medicine at the American University of Beirut. She has led Lebanon's largest medical center for more than 20 mass casualty incidents, and she has extensive experience in hybrid warfare tactics, and is living on the ground as these attacks are expanding of healthcare workers and paramedic responders. So, Dr. Hitti, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us, and we look forward to learning from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth, and thank you to the Consortium of Universities for Global Health for organizing this important webinar. What I hope to share with the audience today is our experience as healthcare teams in Lebanon with the impact of the weaponry that's being used by Israel on Lebanon and the Lebanese population, starting with the pager attack and then circling back to how attacks on health have been a central part of Israel's weaponry and placing health at the center of the battlefield. So for us in Lebanon, the attacks and the escalation started on September 17th, 2024, when Israel deployed and detonated over 3,000 pagers that had explosives within them. This led to thousands of injured flooding into the 150 hospitals across Lebanon and was just emblematic of the type of weaponry and how hybrid warfare can cause large-scale impact and injuries that were novel in terms of the types of injuries, with the eyes and hands being predominantly the body parts that were targeted and injured, but also the burden on healthcare, where every single hospital had to be part of the response in terms of to meet the load. But since then, the weaponry, the attacks have continued. So since September 17th, the shift has been from that form of hybrid warfare to now mainly the M series of bombs. These are bombs that were designed to be used against military infrastructure, being targeting residential areas across Lebanon. And this has been the case since 2024, leading up to the very performative attack of April 8th, where 100 of these were launched against 100 residential areas within 10 minutes. And from there, you can see, as healthcare workers, we can see the impact on civilians, the heavy toll on civilians of this type of weaponry being used in the way that it's being used. And one big metric for how that's impacting civilians is the percentage of patients who are pediatric out of the casualty count. So in Lebanon, that percentage is 10%, second only to Gaza, where 30% of the fatalities are pediatrics. If you want to compare it as a benchmark to Ukraine, there it's less than 1%. And I'm mentioning these because when we talk about attacks on health, I'm just laying the groundwork for what we're seeing in terms of injury patterns. And when there is such a large cohort of pediatric burden of this war, what we end up seeing and what we end up having to face as healthcare teams is really an epidemic of pediatric war injuries, for which the medical literature does not exist in terms of how to care for these patients, because never in the history of mankind has this weaponry been deployed against kids to this extent. And that is what the medical teams have had to do, is build the infrastructure to care for these patients, the largest cohort.
That's 1, 2, 3.
Traumatic. Miss, I think Zeina's online.
Yeah, she is.
Sorry.
We'll have her speak after we're done. She's joining from the car.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Hi, Zeina. So the last form of weaponry that is central to our discussion today is the attacks on health. And I'm going to call it weaponry because I want to come back to the pager attack. So we talked about hybrid warfare being the use of conventional weaponry through non-conventional means to inflict harm. So what do you call it when there are military tactics that are being deployed against healthcare workers and the health sector to inflict harm on a population? This in of itself is a form of hybrid warfare. And the Israeli military has been using 4 main strategies in its attacks on health. The first is the use of targeting of actual hospitals and healthcare facilities. There is an excellent study by Harvard that was conducted 7 weeks after October 7th and looked at craters in proximity to healthcare facilities and found that in Gaza, 25% of the craters that are caused by these bombs were within lethal range of the hospital. Above 80% were within infrastructure range. This pattern is being replicated in Lebanon, where today, in the south of the Litani River, which is the area that the Israeli forces have stated that they want to depopulate, essentially, 60% of the hospitals have been subjected to similar strikes, and a third of the hospitals are now non-functional because of damage, infrastructure damage, and threats. The second type of military warfare that is being deployed against healthcare is sieges of hospitals. Almost every hospital in Gaza has undergone some extent of siege, where military, IOF, basically siege the hospital, force evacuation of patients and caregivers, and then destroy the equipment either partially or fully within the hospital. The third military tactic being used against health is actual attacks on health care workers. Not combatants, these are strikes and assassination of actual healthcare workers. In Gaza, we're looking at 1,700. In Lebanon, between 24 and 26 war, we're over 500 rescue workers and healthcare workers who have been killed through these double tap, triple tap, and most recently quadruple tap, or the targeting of the health centers where these healthcare teams gather. And finally, and I know one of the speakers will be talking about this, the fourth military tactic is actually abducting healthcare workers in the same way that you would think of abduction of combatants, but now here we are deploying it and using this. Israel is using this against healthcare workers. So through these four different mechanisms, what the Israeli army is actually doing is using conventional warfare tactics that are usually used against combatants and military targets, but now using them against health. But we said that conventional warfare or hybrid warfare needs to cause harm. So where is the harm? And that harm is very well documented in Gaza. Pre-war life expectancy in Gaza was 75 years. It is now 35 years. Excess deaths, these are deaths not related to direct trauma, in a Lancet article from July 2024, were estimated at 186,000. With the same modeling, today we're looking at around 400 to 500,000 deaths. And again, these are the same tactics that are being used, especially in terms of the attacks on healthcare workers, the killing of healthcare workers, and the bombings of hospitals or next to hospitals in Lebanon, as they were used in Gaza. So in fact, out of all the weapons that I mentioned, from the initial hybrid warfare of pager attack to the bombs falling on residential buildings, attacks on health are actually the most potent weapon of mass destruction that Israel is using against the population of both the Palestinians and the Lebanese. And how did we get here? We got here in a climate of mainly majority of the international community's silence. This is manufactured silence. It's manufactured by persecution of those who speak out, silencing, sidelining, canceling of talks and sessions. And we've entered here in an era where we have forgotten the lessons learned of the Nuremberg trials that less than 100 years ago really demonstrated the impact of silence in perpetuating atrocities against populations. And here we are. We've entered a new era of warfare with health at its center, where Gaza was just the blueprint, and now we are experiencing the same replicated violence against health and populations, and the population that Israel inflicted on Gaza. This is a product of an international humanitarian law framework that stands strong when it's upheld for all and collapses with a single exception. So I want to end by just thanking the organizers of this webinar for breaking the silence on these war crimes and on attacks on health. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hitti. And I would like to welcome Zeina Khodr. Thank you so much for joining us from your car.
I'm so sorry.
Is a senior correspondent for Al Jazeera. She has reported from the front lines from across the Middle East for over a decade, from Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And she's been recognized with numerous international awards for the bravery of her journalism. On a personal note, I am incredibly grateful that you picked up my cold call this morning and have kindly offered to step in and speak to us about what's happening in Lebanon. Alex Crawford was not able to join us today. She is testifying for the UK Parliament on what's happening in terms of these double and triple airstrikes. And Zeina, it's an absolute honor to have you with us here today, and we're very grateful to hear from you live.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'm sorry I didn't get the chance really to prepare. But I think everybody knows the facts. I'm not going to dwell on how these attacks are deliberate. They are targeted. They violate international humanitarian law. Even if some of these paramedics or some of these organizations are affiliated with Hezbollah, it doesn't make these paramedics lawful military targets. I think, these facts have already been established by human rights groups, and these killings, they're systematic. There is a pattern. It is not an isolated incident. We know this. And it's not just during this conflict in the past few weeks. This is also during the last conflict in 2024. We saw the same thing. These paramedics killed either in their ambulances, in their centers, or while they are rescuing people. I want to focus more on who these people are, because I meet them, I talk to them, I see them, and they're husbands, they are brothers, they are fathers. They left their families, to help to rescue people, and it, and their job is simple. They want to save lives. Yet when you look at them, when you look at their eyes, there's just no life, and it's very telling, because they know they are targets, yet they continue to do this job. I mean, when you look at them, and I'm sorry, but I want to talk about the personal side, because you're all experts. You can talk about, human rights, international law, but what I can talk about is them as human beings who we interact with on the ground on a daily basis. These are people who already are traumatized because they are living in a war zone. They are traumatized because they're worried about their families and their relatives. We all know about that story about that paramedic who ran a center in Nabati, who went on a rescue mission only to find that it was his son who was killed. And there are, numerous stories like this. Sometimes, like, for example, one example, we were in Dar Anun al Nahar, that's a village very close to Tyre. And we were covering the funeral of an entire family who was killed in a single strike. And it was the civil defense or paramedics, first responders, who were, transporting the bodies to the village, and then they were removing the bodies and laying them to rest. And you just watch them, and they don't say a word. And even when you try to approach them, some of them are just silent, and their eyes, I'm sorry, it's very personal, but I feel that this is how I can contribute. I met Ahmad Hariri, who was a paramedic. He was also a photographer, and he was there. And some of them have had to carry their dead colleagues' bodies and bury them. And each one of them, you can't help this in the back of your mind. Am I going to see them again? Are they going to live in the next few hours? Are they going to be killed? And Ahmad Hariri was killed the next day in the same village. And a villager who was still there, I'm sure all of you've seen that video footage of them arriving at the scene of a drone strike, and they were trying to help the people. And another strike came in, and they were killed, and Ahmad was killed. But what I'm trying to say is, it's very difficult for them. They know that they can be targeted at any time, and yet they continue to do this critical job. Without them, people cannot stay. And even if they help wounded fighters, this is not against international law, and it's not justifiable to kill them. And as of late, some of them have started to film their rescue missions in the hope that if they document this double tap or triple tap strikes, then something will be done. Yet some centers that we visited, for example, they didn't even have the money to purchase a camera. Most of these men are volunteers. And then I met another paramedic who was in a hospital in a room with his injured son, who was 8 years old. And because he came home and he parked the ambulance in their courtyard of their house, and his child was playing outside, there was an airstrike right next to the ambulance, and he told me how difficult it was to pick up his injured child, put him in another ambulance, and take him to the hospital. So really, you hear and you encounter so many stories like this. I also covered the Syria conflict for many years, and it was the same thing with the white helmets. That you had this disinformation campaign by the Russian government and the Syrian regime, saying that they were collaborating with the armed opposition. So these white helmets used to wear GoPros in order to document what the initial purpose was, really to document the atrocities, the war crimes, the civilian casualties, civilian infrastructure being targeted, hospitals being targeted all across northern Syria. And at the end, they too were killed in double tap strikes. But with all the footage and all what they have documented, what kind of accountability reality has emerged? Nothing. And I'll just give you one last example. Sometimes it's hard to even approach these these paramedics and ask them, we'd like to interview you, we'd like to ask you a few questions, and they would just stare at you in silence and then just shake their head like no, and then you would wait and then say, and it said, what for? What for? Even if we talk, whatever we say, is it going to change anything? The impunity will continue. Nothing will change. Even if our words, if the world listens to what we are going to say, nothing will change. This will continue, but we will not stop our job because what we believe we are doing is the right thing. These are just some of the encounters that I have had with these paramedics who really in many ways are heroes, because they're just not your ordinary doctor or nurse. They are operating in a war zone, living in a war zone. Their families, they have no clue where their families are, and yet they are being targeted, they're being killed, and their colleagues are being killed.
Zeina, it's incredibly powerful to hear from you and as a journalist. So I'm on behalf of everyone present today and those listening after the fact, we extend our sincerest thanks for the journalism that you do to bring these stories to the world, first and foremost. And thank you for making a point to speak with us here today. And we'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And now I would like to welcome Dr. Ahmed Al-Farah. Dr. Al-Farah is a Palestinian pediatrician and the head of pediatrics and maternity at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, which is in southern Gaza. This is one of the most heavily attacked medical facilities during the genocide against Palestine, and he has continued to deliver life-saving care to children and mothers since the beginning of the genocide. Dr. Al-Farah, it's an absolute pleasure to be with you today, and we look forward to hearing from you about all that you have experienced in your hospital and with the double and triple tap airstrikes on facilities in Gaza and what has been happening with the kidnapping of pediatricians and healthcare workers from Palestine.
Thank you. Thank you, my dear friend, Ruth. Thank you. Good evening, honorable professors, distinguished doctors, and dear colleagues. Thank you for having me in this webinar. Could you share I want to, in 10 or in 5 minutes, I prepare a lecture about stopping the targeting of health workers in Gaza. Okay. Actually, my friends, my colleagues, what's happening in Gaza Strip is not merely a humanitarian crime, nor is it a transient episode of long record of violence. Rather, it represents complete and deliberate collapse of very foundation human existence. This is most vividly seen in health sector, which been exposed for about 900 days to devastating attacks that have severely affected the core of its medical services and infrastructures. Such a crime deserve the term of health genocide, given the catastrophic indicators that have overcome the health and the humanitarian scene. These alarming conditions draw the attention to observe decision makers, health institutions, and the humanitarian organization, especially as emergency response have failed to maintain even a minimum level of services. Hospitals have been turned into concrete shells by direct and indirect military strikes and completely stripped to be diagnostic and have therapeutic capabilities. After nearly 3 years of this criminal war, the number of martyrs is nowadays is 74,000, including 22,000 of children and 11,000 of women. Since the ceasefire, which is fragile and which is fake, We are talking about 1,000 people have been killed and nearly 3,000 injured, and violation of ceasefire have reached nearly 3,000 incidents. The number of martyrs among medical staff in Gaza Strip has reached nearly 1,700. In addition, 362 healthcare workers have been detained under extremely harsh conditions, subjected to enforced disappearance and deprived of their basic rights. I will here mention my colleague, the pediatrician, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, who was suffering too much in the last 1 year and a half. Currently, 25 of 38 hospitals are out of services. The occupation has also destroyed 100 nearly out of 137 primary healthcare centers. The regular supply of medical material have been severely restricted, making access to hospitals extremely difficult. Even after the ceasefire agreement, the increasing number of casualties has exacerbated the shortage of essential medical items. My friend, I'll talk in 4 sections. The first section about Shifa Hospital. This is the emergency department in Shifa Hospital before the war. As you can see, it is something organized, highly equipped by medical supplies, by chairs, by furnitures, by visitors, by doctors. Unfortunately, it was completely targeted. We are talking about 60-bed capacity. We are talking that it could be extended to 120 bed. Really, the Shifa Hospital was, the emergency department was the core for training new boarded doctors from Gaza Strip. Most academic considered it is the backbone of the health sector in Gaza Strip. This is a real picture from the emergency department. As you can see, 2 injured kids are sharing the same beds. As you can see from overcrowdedness, from casualties, unfortunately, mass casualty. You can see a lot of patients are on the ground, sometimes without mattresses, sometimes on something not separated from the floor. This is Shifa Hospital after was completely targeted and distracted. And this is the reception room that we saw before 2 slides when she was burned by the occupational forces. I want to talk about targeting the hospitals. A tragic story about Dunya Abu Muhsin, this lovely girl. Dunya Abu Muhsin, while I was in my office in Tahrir Hospital, the pediatric department at Nasser Medical Complex, that night when I suddenly woke up at the sound of a huge explosion that shook the entire building, the blast was extremely violent and loud. We smelled heavy smoke coming from a nearby room. We discovered that a tank shell had struck a patient who had been receiving treatment for several days. Dunya Abu Muhsin, the most cheerful girl in the section, had already lost all her family members, and one of her legs has been amputated. Unfortunately, before this accident or this attacking, Dunya Abu Muhsin told me that her ambition was to become a doctor and be specialized in reconstructing amputated limbs so that she could treat and help patients in the future. She passed away while she was sleeping, most likely dreaming of receiving a prosthetic limb or artificial limb and recovering soon. However, all her dreams, along with her breath, came to an abrupt end, and that treacherous tank shell. This is the picture of Dunya Abu Muhsin, who was 12 years old. She was killed at Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza on Monday, 17 December 2023. Section 3, I want to talk about premature babies. It's also important to note that 33% of newborn babies were born prematurely. Around 100,000 pregnant and lactating women have suffered from malnutrition. In addition, 356 infants were born and died during the war. And this is the picture of premature baby who was in Shifa Hospital, and we lost a lot of them because of the electricity was cut off, and there is no electricity from the engine while the siege of the occupational forces on Shifa Hospital. Section 4, this is Muhammad Al-Habibi, one of my student. He's from Al-Azhar University. In the 6th-year medical student, he was in the surgery department in Nasser Medical Complex, and he was killed while he was in the hospital on the 25th of August 2025, when the occupational forces targeted, as they said, that they targeted a journalist in the hospital who was putting a camera on that hospital, and they killed in that massacre nearly 12 innocent people. One of them is Dr. Muhammad Al-Habibi, one of the intelligent student of Al-Azhar University. The last doctor who was killed, and I think, I hope that he will be the last one, doctor of Al-Aqsa Hospital, Jamal Abu Aoun, who was killed a short while ago in an airstrike in Deir al-Balah, nearly in 30 of last May. And this is the while they pray for him, Dr. Jamal Abu Aoun. This is nearly 8 days ago. This is the last one I want to talk. These are a number of nurses who was killed by the occupational forces among this war. This, يعني, it's I couldn't talk about that. This is horrible to see that faces and that number of nurses who was killed among this criminal war.
Dr. Al-Farah, I'd like to, oh, I'm sorry.
In conclusion, Gaza is being killed in every possible way, and the occupation inventing new tools of crime. In Gaza, death is not an accident. It is a daily reality crafted with accuracy and violence. Gaza is killed by sniper bullets, bombed by tanks and warplanes, blown apart by drones and killer robots, starved through blockade and famine. Deprivation also, we should mention, fetuses are aborted in starving wombs. Gaza is dying in every possible way, while the occupation doesn't just kill, it invent and perfect the tool of a crime. It tests its weapons on fragile bodies, strangles children with hunger, and block hope even in the war. This is not a war. This is a system of health that spares no one, not even the unborn. Thank you.
Dr. Alfara, I would like to thank you for your bravery in continuing to serve despite the truly horrific conditions that you have endured every day since the beginning of the genocide. And I would like to thank you as well for your bravery in showing us the colleagues that you have lost. That was really remarkable to see that in your presentation in that way. So my heartfelt thanks on behalf of everyone present here today for your service.
Thank you.
And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Naji Abbas. Dr. Abbas is the Director of Prisoners and Detainees for Physicians for Human Rights Israel. His role is to document and advocate for the fair treatment of those who have been kidnapped and detained, and to prevent torture and mistreatment of Palestinian healthcare workers that are being held in Israeli prisons. Dr. Abbas, before I wanted to congratulate you on behalf of everyone here for your exceptional work and the exceptional work of Physicians for Human Rights Israel in putting pressure on the Supreme Court to order Israeli prison authorities to allow full access to the ICRC and Physicians for Human Rights Israel for all of the Palestinian healthcare workers that are being held in Israeli prisons. So with that, I pass it over to you.
Thank you, Ruth. First of all, I need to clarify I'm not a doctor, I'm a lawyer. And thank you for your words. I will explain how we work in front of the Supreme Court in the end, because we believe if we use as an NGO based in Israel, Palestine, we use every tool that we have, but we don't have much faith or trust in the Israeli legal system, on the Israeli Supreme Court. But it's a tool that we have. And what we believe that what led to this decision after 2 years and a half is the international pressure, not the Israeli legal system. If we go back to our issue today, what I wanted to explain today is how detaining and arresting the mass arrests of healthcare workers and doctors, nurses, and paramedics during the genocide was part of a wider policy of the Israeli army to destroy the health system in Gaza. Because beside bombing the hospitals, the building itself, and invading the hospitals, from the first weeks of the genocide in the late 2023, the Israeli soldiers and the Israeli army started to arrest dozens and hundreds of healthcare workers each time they invaded one facility. That started with Al Shifa Hospital in December 2023 and again in March 2024, in Nasser Hospital in March 2024, and after that with Kamal Adwan in the end of 2024. And this policy of destroying the health system in Gaza was used and was part, an essential part of the genocide, and was used as a military tactics by the Israeli army. By destroying the health system in Gaza, the, the Israeli army aimed to force the community to leave their areas. That what happened in the city of Gaza with Al Shifa Hospital, and that happened in Khan Yunis with Nasser Hospital, and we saw that clearly actually in the end of 2024 when they invaded Kamal Adwan in the north of Gaza, and arrested all of the dozens of the staff there, including Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, the director of the hospital. The aim and the goal of the Israeli army was to push the community to leave the north of Gaza. So they used the destruction of the health system as a war tactics. And as I mentioned, when the staff of the hospital refused to leave their patients, as the case of Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, who declared again and again, I won't leave my community. I won't leave the patient, the civilians who needs me and needs our services. So the solution by the Israeli army was to arrest them all. In Nasser Hospital in March 2024, they arrested 70 healthcare workers from the hospital. The majority of the surgeons, including the head of the surgery department, was arrested and he's still detained, Dr. Naid Abu Taima. Dr. Hussam Abu Sofia is still detained because he refused to leave his patients. And in Nasser Hospital, for example, they arrested dozens of surgeons. So they didn't destroy the buildings at all, but they left the hospital without the service that they can provide to the injured people. And detaining the healthcare workers and the senior doctors till now are preventing the rebuilding of the health system. That one of the causes why Israel is still holding those doctors and those healthcare workers. We are speaking about more than 50 healthcare workers, including 16 doctors who are still being held in Israeli detention centers without any charges in front far from the Israeli propaganda in the media. When you in the media you can see the Israeli army speaks about that Al Shifa hospital is one of the main centers, operation centers for Hamas, but on the Israeli court itself they are not charging any doctor with that. You will see in the media the Israeli army speaking about Dr. Hussam Abu Safia that as a military chief, but in the Israeli court itself, you won't find any charges against Dr. Hussam because they don't have. And one of the causes why they are, maybe the first cause why they attacked and targeted the healthcare workers is to destroy the health system. And now we believe that one of the causes why they are still holding these doctors because they are afraid of the voice of these doctors. They know that the cause of Dr. Hussam and the story of Dr. Hussam and the other doctors, Dr. Musab Sem'an and Dr. Murad Koka and Dr. Nada Butaima is being followed by the international community, by the international media, and they're afraid of what they will speak out and what they will tell about what they faced during the months and some of them for more than 2 years of detention. Because we are speaking about people who were tortured without any cause. People, some of them were killed, like Dr. Adnan al-Burj, Dr. Iyad al-Rantisi. The last one who was killed from the healthcare workers was Hatem Rayyan, just in last February, a paramedic who died in one of the detention facilities in Israel. So they are afraid, the Israelis are afraid of the stories, of the voice of these healthcare workers. We are speaking about people who were forcibly disappeared. Dr. Adnan Bursh, when he died in April 2024, it was the first thing that we heard about him after 5 months. He was arrested and vanished. No one, not his family, not the ICRC, not his lawyers, not us, BHRI, managed to have any information about him. The first thing that we heard after 5 months that he was killed. Other doctors till now are suffering from medical problems that were caused by the beating and the violence and the torture of the Israeli soldier and the Israeli guards. The doctors are being held in horrific conditions. Every doctor, every healthcare workers in detention, as thousands of Palestinian detainees, are facing a serious risk for their lives every day. Every minute we can hear about a tragedy of a Palestinian detainee who got killed, including the healthcare workers, because they are denied from medical treatment inside the Israel prisons. They are facing daily and weekly violence. They are disconnected totally from the outside world. The decision that you mentioned, Ruth, in the beginning about giving access to the ICRC, as I mentioned, it was given because, and you can see it in the decision itself. The judges is explaining that because the detention centers in Israel are described as Guantanamo, that's why they need to let the ICRC access. But that doesn't mean that it will happen in the ground. Because before 6 months, the same court gave a decision that Palestinian detainees are being starved, but nothing changed. And the same court accepted that nothing is changing. So you can today, after 2 years of 2 years and a half of genocide, of official targeting of healthcare workers in front of all the world and the international community, we don't have much trust in the Israeli legal system to give protection for these doctors and these healthcare workers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you that of the participants today, I am sent WhatsApp messages following your work, and a number of the people, or dozens of the people who are participants with us today, follow your work closely in advocating for the release of these healthcare workers who have been kidnapped. So I want you to know that. And after we hear from Dr. Ahmed, one of the things that I was hoping we could cover in the question and answer, Dr. Patel is with us online, and we have of the participants here today, we would like to better understand how letters can be written in support of your work and what we can do concretely to advance the mission to make sure that physicians are not being held and tortured without being tried or without sentencing. So, and with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Thayer Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed is an emergency physician based in Chicago. He has extensive humanitarian experience spanning the globe, from Syria, Lebanon, Gaza's Nasa Hospital. He is one of the doctors that is featured in the documentary film American Doctor, which I encourage everyone listening and participating to go and see. It's an incredibly powerful documentary. And he's here today to speak to us further about the deliberate attacks on healthcare of first responders, of paramedics, and the kidnapping of healthcare workers. Dr. Ahmed, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gibson. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So I thank you, Ruth and Keith, for setting this up. I really appreciate that. And I echo what Dr. Evelyn was saying, and just being able to create some of these spaces and break through some of the censorship and the silencing that kind of exists when it pertains to Palestine and Lebanon and other parts of the world. So I really do appreciate that. And I think it's a remarkable thing that we've been able to do to create this space and come together as a community. I won't take too long. I think my colleagues have done an incredible job kind of detailing all of this. And of course, I think the voices of Dr. Evelyn and Dr. Ahmed spoke really eloquently and strongly about the conditions, and really appreciate our colleague Naji for detailing some of the efforts as well as some of the failures. So maybe what I can do, and I will share sort of this a brief PowerPoint here that I made, is I can maybe just talk a little bit about, what I would like to just sort of mention my personal experience having served in Palestine, worked with my Palestinian healthcare workers who have done an incredible job, and then also just really mention, these are the physicians that are still abducted. And I had the pleasure, and Naji mentioned Dr. Nahid. I had the pleasure of working with Dr. Nahid when I was at Nasser Hospital working on patients, and this is a senior consultant. This is a very senior member of the Palestinian healthcare worker community in Gaza. I was able to work with Dr. Mahmoud in the ICU. Of course, I know Dr. Hussein very well. I spoke to his son a couple of days ago, and many of these other healthcare workers. And so one pattern that I also want to emphasize, just as somebody who is an educator here in the United States, is there also was this very well-established core of healthcare leadership in Palestine, in Gaza, that was targeted, abducted, and killed. And I will talk about some of the names in this next slide here. I mean, we talked about Dr. Adnan. Dr. Adnan is a world-renowned orthopedic surgeon. So when he was found dead in Al Hospital, as Naji mentioned, I mean, this was not just a personal tragedy, a loss of another innocent soul, of somebody who's a healthcare worker who should have been protected. This is a devastating loss for the future of healthcare in Gaza, for all of the future aspiring orthopedic surgeons. This is who we lost when Dr. Adnan was found dead, found killed. You also will see Dr. Marwan Al-Hams, Marwan Sultan, a senior cardiologist, a director of one of the hospitals. You'll see in this corner here Dr. Nabhan, who is an ICU senior consultant, was at Shifa Hospital. His son is in the United States trying to finish his medical career, and his father was killed in Jabalia in an airstrike. And again, this is an ICU doctor who I had the pleasure of meeting before October 7th and working alongside of, who now forever will no longer be able to have his expertise, his knowledge, his experience. Thabat Salim was a neonatologist in the Gaza Strip working at Aqsa, a young, brilliant physician who was killed in her tent. And then, of course, here was an example of a released Palestinian director prisoner, Dr. Ahmed. The reason I bring this up too is you've got this pattern of either of these senior doctors, leadership people who are being killed, some who are abducted, and some who, even after being abducted are released. And I think you talk about this on an individual perspective, case by case, and you can see how horrible it is. And then you think about it on a system level in terms of the institutional knowledge that they bring to the table, and you worry about who's going to fill that gap. You cannot fill this gap overnight. This is going to be decades and it's going to affect generations. And then you think about the toll and the mental trauma that many of the physicians who have been released from Israeli captivity or their prison system. And you think about those who had to witness that take place. And you think about those in the hospitals who lost their colleagues and who had to experience all of that. And you wonder, how could we, as just an international community, continue to ask Palestinian healthcare workers to show up to work every day? I know they're doing that, and they are showing up to work every day, and they are incredibly knowledgeable. But if you are in healthcare leadership or you're in administration like I am, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous ask to ask Palestinian healthcare workers, first responders, nurses to continue to show up to work every single day, knowing that you cannot afford them the protections, the safety, the security, or the supplies that they need. And then to ask our first responders to hop in ambulances, even though they're clearly marked and they have the sirens, and ask them to go and retrieve the wounded and sick. It's something that is really, when you think about it, an absurd ask. And that's why I would also bring up, with respect to, we all saw the New York Times document what happened to the Palestinian Red Crescent in March of last year when they went on a call and responded in Rafah and they were gunned down by the Israeli military. This was something that was documented on camera. And again, this is a pattern that we continue to see, despite there being sort of global cases that caused outrage. When Hind Rajab was trapped in her car, the Palestinian Red Crescent dispatched Ahmed and Yusuf to go and retrieve her. And when they were 50 yards away, we know that they were killed. Well, that is not some sort of mistake. That was a clear and intentional message that's being sent to the entire healthcare system, not just in Palestine, not just in Lebanon when they did double or triple taps, but it's really to the entire world. It's that international humanitarian law is going to be ignored because when the powerful decide that it doesn't matter, they can cast it away and there's nothing that anybody can do about it. And so my hope is that, as you heard from some of my colleagues, that this would prompt us to consider how we can work in terms of advocacy, how we can change some of the leadership that have been silent, and how we can continue to express acts of solidarity with Palestinian and Lebanese healthcare workers. These are pictures that I took. This is from Nasser Hospital in the courtyard. This is a blown up ambulance. It became a regular sight in Gaza. This is in this picture here. This is Deir al-Balah, just driving through on the way to Al-Aqsa Hospital. These are blown up ambulances on the side of the road, out of commission, unable to be used to retrieve wounded or sick, and also likely where the workers who were inside of these vehicles, experienced their last moments. And I think what's kind of taken place in Palestine and Lebanon as a result of dehumanization, which is something that all of us I think, need to combat is we've normalized these pictures. We've normalized the idea that if you put the word Palestinian or Lebanese in front of doctor, nurse, or first responder or paramedic, that could suggest that there is something wrong about that person. Maybe they're doing something wrong. And that's what dehumanization does. And that's something that we can combat. We can make sure that the language is correct when the media is expressing this, elected officials are trying to express this, or everyday people who may not be aware of what's happening on the ground. It's absurd. I think I would argue that to become a doctor in Palestine, it's a much longer and more difficult road than probably in the United States or the UK, in my opinion. I think, first of all, the experience that they develop and the knowledge that they have just in a first, and experience it firsthand, to me is remarkable. It's incredible. It's clear that there's a lot of effort there. There is no difference between the process of becoming a healthcare professional in this part of the world than it is in the Western world or the global North or whatever you'd want to call it. But we've allowed people to somehow change the narrative. And that sort of inherent racism and dehumanization is what allows these kinds of violations to take place. If I can dehumanize Palestinians and Lebanese people, then it's okay for me to kill the doctors and the children and the nurses and blow up the ambulances. If I can make you for 1 second subliminally or subconsciously think they're lesser than, then I've succeeded in my strategic campaign towards destroying the healthcare system. And I totally agree with what my colleagues have expressed. This was a strategic and intentional and methodical effort to destroy the healthcare system in Palestine and what you're seeing take place in Lebanon. And again, what is the ultimate goal here? And this is why people are calling it genocide or medicide. The goal would be that you can depopulate the Gaza Strip. And how do you do that? Well, if people get sick and injured and they can't go to hospitals or they can't safely reach these hospitals, then they may be more inclined or incentivized to leave, or forced displacement, ethnic cleansing is what some of us would call that. This is a video that I took in Al-Aqsa Hospital's ICU room. The doctor had showed me that this is their call room, and he had showed me that just a week earlier, a bullet had flown in from the window and embedded in the wall when he was sleeping in the call room. And so, again, a doctor that's sleeping in a call room, what on earth would justify a sniper firing a bullet into this room? And that's something that was really tough to reconcile when we're sitting there, just thinking of our own call rooms and the rest of the world, and thinking how ridiculous it would be for a bullet to fly through one of these windows, and how that would cause some uproar. And then, Dr. Ahmed had mentioned Dunya Abu Muhsin. I had the opportunity to visit her room, and this is where she was killed. I mean, you can still see the damage on the drywall. She had been killed 3 weeks earlier when I had visited. And, she's an example of the thousands of children who have been killed, but she was in a hospital bed. I mean, she was sitting there recovering, and somehow a tank shell finds its way into her room. This is absurd. And then this is the outside. This is the hallway when I was there at Nasser Hospital. And this is the pediatric hallway. So you can see, imagine a tank shell flying through a room, with all of these kids and families who have been forcibly displaced and in these rooms. So it truly is absurd. One thing I wanted to show, I don't want to get too medical, but this was a case at Al-Aqsa Hospital. This is an ultrasound that we're using because the CT scanner was not functioning and they could not get the spare parts to repair it. And there was a patient sitting in the bed, and this is really demonstrating that he has a bowel obstruction. I mean, he's got these dilated bowels and he's not really moving. And so, we're sitting there and we're very concerned that this patient obviously needs to go to the operating room, but the supplies weren't there. The diagnosis is not really confirmed with the CT scanner. And then the next morning, we're praying over the body of this patient here, knowing that he could have survived this injury had the supplies been allowed in. And
So,
then,
Dr. Ahmed, I would like to thank you for joining us now, I think for the second time on the Consortium of University for Global Health. I'm very grateful that you've joined us for a second time to speak more about what's happening. And I want to make sure that we have 15 minutes for questions and answers, because we have 120 people with us online. who would like to speak and ask questions and engage in discussions with the panelists. So, what I would appreciate if the audience could do now is enter questions into the chat, and Keith and I will monitor those with Elizabeth's help. And if you message me directly, we also have the option to unmute you so you can ask questions to our panelists live. And so, Elizabeth, if I could please ask you to unmute Dr. Patel, who would like to ask a question of the panelists. So if we could please begin there, Elizabeth.
Yeah, and I think I'm unmuted now. Can everybody hear me? Or can you hear me, Ruth?
I can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah. I just want to first say thank you so much for giving a space, a time and a space, and also to talk about this, but also to have these remarkable people on this call. You know, often I feel like we don't hear the voices on the ground, especially from Palestinians, to be able to bear witness and to actually tell their stories and what they're seeing. Two our colleagues that have been invited to speak. You know, one of the things I'm thinking about as an American pediatrician and humanitarian worker is you know, we are bearing witness to your stories, and you know that's concept of témoignage, bearing witness. How do we, and you know, this onus falls on us. The burden falls on us as Americans. How would you recommend, or how would you advise us to move beyond hearing these stories and bearing witness to these stories and giving space and time to these stories, and actually implementing change? You know, one of the things that I struggle with as a leader within different organizations is, are we complicit by being a part of these institutions, or um, are we able to create change by staying within these institutions and, you know, advocating based off these stories that we're hearing? Do you have advice to us as providers, pediatricians, doctors, humanitarians, to be able to, how do we help implement change based off of these stories that we're hearing? Thank you so much.
Dr. Hitti?
I can speak to that kind of from my opinion on because I've thought about this as well. I'm part of the American Academy of Emergency Medicine, um, and struggled with, do you step away and or do you maintain your presence in those spaces? And I would say in drawing from the people of the land don't cede territory. So I really think it's really important to remain and stay in those spaces. And I think there's a lot North American physicians can do. I've given talks on attacks on health across, I think, 3 continents, 4 continents at this point. And the one place where I have not been invited into an academic setting to give a talk is the United States of America.
Oh, you haven't been
So,
invited in. This is Zoom.
no, I've talked in the US, but it's always been outside of the academic organizations because there's so much fear of inviting me into the university setting. So what I'm trying to say is that I think first and foremost in the US is challenging the persecution and the silencing and the canceling of discussions on attacks on health. What are we talking about here? So really upholding academic freedom and reclaiming your rights to academic freedom in higher ed and in medical schools and education systems in the US is, I think, the most foremost fight to have. I think there's a lot to be done at the level of medical organizations. Medical organizations in the United States have been very silent on the issue, I think, except for 1 or 2. British Medical Association has called for boycotting the Israeli Medical Association, and upholding the not just the safeguarding the rights of healthcare workers in Gaza and elsewhere, but also upholding the rights of those who speak out against attacks on health and preventing their persecution. So there are lots of examples outside of the US, and I think there's a lot of room to be done in medical organizations in the US and conferences in the US and academic organizations. So I think all of us can have so much bandwidth, but you do what you can within those spaces. And that is my suggestion. And that's not even going into journals and publications. There's very little in North American journals, academic medical journals, that's published on this or makes it through to publication. Whereas you look at Lancet and BMJ and other European organizations are even better than US organizations in terms of at least bringing to the forefront some of these issues for discussion and debate. Thank you.
Naji, would you like to add something on there?
I just shortly, because Dr. Evelyn covered that. I believe besides the general activism and advocacy, each one of us, especially healthcare workers around the world, can act from their position as healthcare workers in the institute and the organization and the association that they are member of. Because while we are speaking and describing a genocide and targeting healthcare workers, you will find the Israeli Medical Association acting like everything is normal, speaking about ethics in international conferences, like nothing is happening. 5 minutes far from them. And as Dr. Evelyn mentioned, the act that the British Medical Association, the Turkish Medical Association, the South African Medical Association took in the last year is something, and one of the kinds of the actions that can be pushed for. The WMA, the World Medical Association, declared and stated about the neutrality of healthcare workers, but till now they are not speaking clearly and loudly with solidarity with their Palestinian colleagues. And that's what we hope and we are pushing for in the General Assembly in October 2026 of the WMA, that the WMA and National Medical Association should speak and stand with solidarity with their colleagues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abbas. I'm going to telescope a few questions in the interest of time because this has been outstanding. So, Evelyn, this webinar will be shared with 30,000 people around the world. Many of them are in academia. And as I said, this is a process with Dr. Gibson. We're going to work with all of you and others to keep pushing this forward. Couple of questions. One there. Can you briefly just describe how Israel's used the international health rules and regulations? They basically neutered them. What can we do to bring this back if that's even a reasonable path forward? And Wendy wants to know from all of you, but particularly perhaps Naji, how can all of us will receive this, advocate for the release of the doctors that are currently incarcerated by Israel without charge? There, please, and then Naji after, and anybody else, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of briefly outline kind of what I thought. There are a couple of things that we can definitely do with some sort of tangible results that I think would change the status quo. Of course, reinforcing, for example, Palestinian institutions through partnerships, through support, I think is incredibly important because Palestinian institutions are under attack. You know, there's the Ministry of Health of Palestine. That, you know, the idea is to make sure that that can fail and doesn't exist and be replaced with international organizations, for example. And that's something that we need to combat. We need to make sure any international organizations that are interested in working in Palestine, that they're really fighting to support Palestinian institutions, Palestinian healthcare workers. I think that's, you know, that's solidarity. That's what, you know, solidarity is about. How do we help exchange knowledge with each other? How do we support the institutions? Second, there is leadership that needs to be held accountable, you know, and Dr. Evelyn talked about this, but the AMA is the largest, you know, medical society, professional medical society in the United States, 40,000 members. They just had a conference in Chicago and they refused to mention anything that was happening to Palestinians or the Lebanese healthcare workers. The leadership should be changed. And that's something that through membership organizing that I think would be incredible. Finally, in terms of advocacy efforts, if we can get specific about advocacy efforts on a governmental level, for example, let's combine our efforts and work on that medical evacuation system that used to exist before October 7th. Let's get Palestinian patients in Gaza able to go to Palestinian doctors in Jerusalem or in the West Bank and be treated, not send them, for example, to Europe or to Russia or to China. Let them be able to stay within Palestine. I think these kinds of things are like challenging this idea of dual use lists. saying that, there is no list that exists. Why are we saying that this oxygen canister can be used as a weapon or something? I think all of that are ways that we can kind of change the conversation and that we can make sure that the healthcare institutions are protected in Palestine, but also that we're changing the narrative and we're changing just the framework when it comes to this.
I just shortly want to add, Dr. Ahmed covered it all, but it's right. Israel in the last 2 years and a half managed to violate every a part of the international humanitarian law that we think about. But Israel till now sees itself and claims that it's a state of law, or that they want to be part of the West and the international community. And we, as a human rights supportive or activists, we should use that. We should use this interior conflict between what Israel claims or dream about themselves, the Israeli, and what they are doing and acting. As I mentioned, till now, Israel is part of the all of the international organization, medical organization, and political organization, academic organization. They are acting like business as usual, and we should use that, and we should push in these places. That's first of all. About releasing the doctors, Dr. Hussam and the other doctors, uh, to be honest, we don't know what the effective tool is to bring them there for their families. We don't know. We are using everything. We are reaching out to medical organization, to medical associations, to the WMA, to diplomats, to member of parliaments, uh, everything. We are trying actually everything because we had the hope that they will get released in the exchange deal in last October. Because we are speaking about doctors, first of all, protected by the international humanitarian law, and we are speaking about people who are not facing any charges, nothing. We had this hope, and actually the doctors had this hope. But since then, and that unfortunately that didn't happen, we are doing everything. We are trying to use every tool that we can think about.
Thank you very much, Najee. We're going to loop back to you after this for some more advice. I'd like to give the last word to Dr. Hitti and Dr. Alfar if you have any last comments before Dr. Gibson closes this. And thanks all of you for your extremely generous comments. And I'll make a closing word too. So Dr. Hitti, please, and then Dr. Alfara.
I guess I don't have much to add. I think other than the pushing for the advocacy in all the spaces that one can. I mean, just to reiterate that all of us have influence in specific areas and in specific spaces, whether it's academic, whether it's within medical organization, whether it's legal aspects, whether it's just whether being on a conference where we can add these issues and these items for discussion. And my appeal is that we push in all of those directions where we can. And thank you. And that's why I appreciate this webinar so much, because I do think it is these kind of small initiatives that will have a snowball effect ultimately.
Thank you, Dr. Hitti. We're extremely grateful to you and all of the speakers. Thank you. Dr.
Okay.
Alfara, please.
Yes. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity. My friends and colleagues, please don't stop talking about Gaza. Don't stop talking about Gaza. We are really suffering. And I not exaggerate the complaint about we are suffering nowadays in the most hard or the most period of time of this war. Nowadays, they are talking about the ceasefire. There is no ceasefire, no electricity, no water. The rodents are spreading more and more. The situation is very bad. Even the rodents are increasing in the number and the behavior. We are facing a lot of cases of rickettsia, a lot of cases of impetigo, a lot of cases of gastroenteritis. The food is couldn't be preserved because there is no refrigerator, no electricity. So all the world is talking about the situation in Gaza is nearly ended and ceasefire is applied. No, it's completely untrue, and the situation is more worse and worse, and we are suffering more and more. I'm talking to my family every day. No way to continue in this life. No way to continue this life. It's better to be in the first days of the war than it is nowadays. Again, we are talking about human beings, not ink on paper, not numbers. They are doctors, they are pharmacists, they are lecturers. They have the right to learn, the right to educate, the right to travel, and the right to receive health services. Thank you for your time, and please don't stop talking about Gaza.
Thank you, Dr. Love. Thank you for your bravery and courage and honoring us with being on this webinar. Where we can't do without you and all of the other wonderful speakers that we have here. Before I turn it to Ruth, I just, if I may say, in terms of action items for all of you who are on, and thank you very much for attending this webinar. As was mentioned, speak publicly, speak to elected officials. Denunciations are not enough. Action matters. These are political choices and therefore requires political action. Countries act. So for all countries, wherever you are, particularly here in the United States, we call for and demand the protection of healthcare workers and healthcare facilities. Second, stop weapons going to Israel. Third, stop funding Israel because that money bleeds into the apparatus that's killing people in both Palestine and in Lebanon. Prosecute the perpetrators who are murdering our healthcare workers. Call for the release of all of the physicians and healthcare workers that are currently incarcerated. And we'll get from Naji and others a list of those, and we'll share them with you so you have the names of who those people are. And if I can say, just to the challenge on dehumanization, to humanize people, I've had the honor of traveling to Palestine on 2 occasions in a previous job. And speaking personally, I have never in my life found kinder people anywhere on the face of the planet. That's just the way it is. I would hope that you would find at some time to travel to Palestine, meet Palestinian people. I'm sure you'll come away with the same conclusion. With that, before I turn it over to Ruth, I just want to thank Elizabeth Hurani here. This could not happen without her. Great organization. And again, I want to thank my partner in crime, Dr. Gibson, as always, for her leadership. Ruth, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. I'm very grateful to the panelists who have joined us from across the Middle East today, and for those of you joining us online. We truly have people spanning the globe. One of the points of note is that many of our Iranian colleagues from the International Committee for the Red Crescent did not have internet to be able to join us today. And I think that part of the goal here with what Keith and I are doing with these panels is to bring issues into the forefront and into the discussion across 200 universities spanning the world. So I'm going to enter my email into the chat. And one of the things that I think that Keith and I will discuss, and we're open to your feedback on how we do this next time, is making sure that we have concrete action items of how we can get letters available to you that you can be signing as part of your medical professional organizations to make sure that we are working as an international community to speak out against these atrocities. And with that, I thank all of you for your participation today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.